Dr. DeCubellis here. Just wanted to jump in real quick. Just had a meeting with an attorney earlier this morning, and we were talking about some cases that they have, and we were going over some of the cases that they found, just didn't think there was much going on there. Biggest problem and common theme was going to be A, the person either didn't follow the treatment plan that was laid out by their treating physician, or B, there was a gap in care. So I asked the attorney, let's go through these one by one. Let's see if there's anything I can help you with and see if there's any way you can salvage some of these. Now, when it came to the treatment plan, for most of them, when you don't follow a treatment plan, there's going to be not too much you can do. It's basically telling the insurance company, the adjuster, the judge, the jury, that you didn't really need the treatment because you weren't as injured as you initially said you were. However, there could be some caveats to that. One patient, or a client, when I was going through their file and talking with the attorney about, the reason that they didn't follow up with the original course of treatment for their herniation that they had going on was because they developed a problem with the treatment of another area that was injured in the accident. They were having a heart condition, and because of that, they had a pacemaker at the time, and with the collision, it kind of screwed up not only the placement of the pacemaker, it was coming loose, but some of the wiring as well. So what was happening is that as they were going through therapy, that problem itself wasn't getting any better. They had to go in, they had surgery to kind of correct the placement of the pacemaker. So while it looked like there was a gap in care there and they weren't following the treatment plan, they had a legitimate reason that was also tied to the accident. So when I showed the attorney these things, again, it makes the case look a little bit better, and it's not as bad as it seems when you just look at a gap in treatment, 4 weeks of no physical therapy. Yes, that doesn't sound great, but when you look at the reason why it's also pertaining to the auto accident, that's going to be okay. Next thing, we looked at another case. Person stopped getting treatment, and then after that, they started going to treatment again after about 6 months. So I looked at this. In this case, we had two things come up. First of all, the person moved. So they moved to an area to where it was no longer going to be feasible to go to the treatment place they were going before. And then second, they had a death in the family. So we look at these things, and while both of those are going to be legitimate excuses, 6-month time period is not going to be a legitimate time for those two excuses. So in that case, the case is not going to be as good as it would have been if they would have followed the treatment plan. Yes, we understand if you move, but within about 2 weeks, you need to find a new place to be getting treatment. You can't be waiting 6 months. Also, we understand if you have a death in the family, but we have to look at typical mourning times, and 6 months isn't a typical mourning time for you to just not do anything, especially because the person was going to work. They were going out to the movies. They were doing other things at this time. So again, it doesn't make sense to say, well, I had this death, I couldn't get my therapy, but I could go to work, I could hang out with friends, I could do all this other stuff. So the final one we went over, and this was probably the most interesting one, is that, again, it was someone who had a gap in treatment. So we looked at how they had this gap in treatment, and they were initially injured in, let's say, July. They went to the ER. The ER didn't find anything at that time. They were having some minor symptoms, and then they slowly kind of got worse and worse and worse. And after about 4 weeks, the pain had gotten so bad that they wanted to seek a second opinion. So they went to their primary care. They went to an ortho. They went to all the doctors, and that's when they started care for that 4 weeks. So at that point, the attorney's thinking, hey, at 4 weeks, this is just too long. It's not going to be able to be linked back to that. So I looked at the notes and I said, well, we've got a couple of things that are working in your favor here. First is going to be that they did go to the hospital right away. Anytime you go to the hospital right away, it shows that there is an immediate need, and we're making sure that there isn't anything major. Also, the symptoms that they had 4 weeks later were also the same symptoms that they mentioned when they went to the emergency room. They just didn't have an emergency condition at that time. Also, the pain wasn't as bad at that point, and it got worse as time went on, which is, as you know, if you follow the research, is very, very possible depending on what is injured, where it's injured, the severity, and all those other factors. So in this case, it made sense, and we're talking about going from a severity of a 5 to an 8, not from a 1 to a 10. 5 to an 8 makes perfect sense, especially after 4 weeks. When they weren't given any treatment at that time because they were told that they had no issues, the ER said it would get better on its own. It didn't, and then they saw treatment after that. They got the diagnosis. I won't go into what their diagnosis was, but it made sense. So I walked the attorney through this. The problem was just that when it came to seeing those things, they were missing records from a couple different very important examiners or treaters at that time. And when I asked him about that, he had said, yes, the patient did mention something about that, but they had this huge gap in their notes as well, which is why it's so important to get the attorneys your notes. Make sure that they have everything they need, because otherwise they're operating by what they see in front of them, and they might settle the case much sooner than they should because, again, they're working off of something different than what's actually going on. So I helped the attorney out with that. They got in contact with the treating doctors, and that case is going to be salvageable. It's not going to sell for $2,000 like he was worried it was going to. He's going to get better value for that, which is great for the client too because they've got some real injuries. So just want to go ahead and share that with you. At first glance, things aren't necessarily as bad as they seem when we talk about a gap in treatment, as long as there's a legitimate reason that can be explained and it makes sense and it's not something crazy. Because if you say one thing and you're doing something else, saying I can't get treated because of XYZ, but you're going out with your friends and work and weeks are passing, that's probably going to destroy the case.